Okay, so thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate your time because we know that you must be very busy getting ready for the start of a very unique term, I think, and potentially whole year. So as we've already mentioned, if you've just joined, please do add your name, your institution and your role so you can see, as well as us, who's in the virtual room and what your potential interest in this webinar is. We have a very active community of practice around this, these surveys, so please do look on our website and join that if you want to continue the conversation after this webinar. So today we're delighted to run this webinar for the launch of our Student 2020 Digital Experience Insight Survey results and findings. So we hope that this will be a very engaging and interactive session. So we would love for you to put your observations in the chat, and if you have any specific questions to either the panelists, so that's my colleagues at JISC, or indeed other colleagues on the call, please do put them in the question and answers area that you'll see when you look at your controls. So today, normally we would launch these reports at the ALT conference, but as you all know, unfortunately this year it's been cancelled and they had an online session in the summer, and they'll be having another online conference in December, so look out for that. So today we're doing a webinar that's focusing on the HE report that we've found. And we've produced this year a slightly longer at-a-glance publication that will cover more of the insights and findings relative to the situation that we find ourselves in. So today, after this brief introduction, Sarah will go through the detail of the questions under each of the themes in the surveys. So, and tomorrow we'll be focusing on FE. So if you're interested in the FE results, please do join us same time tomorrow. You can join up on our JISC events page. So the Digital Experience Insight surveys, what are they? Basically, they're surveys that provide powerful evidence of what your students, teaching staff and professional service staff, and new this year, we're going to launch a researcher survey. So they're surveys that ask the end users, the recipients of your digital infrastructure, what is their experience like? And it's very useful data, not only for you to look at your institution to see how you compare to other organisations that are also participating, but also to maybe baseline where you're at within your digital transformation strategies. So we have a number of institutions that have taken this approach, running the surveys year on year, and we have lots of brilliant case studies on our website where you can see how institutions are using these. Over the last few months, we've been very busy working with some expert colleagues in refining the question set to reflect the current situation that we find ourselves in with COVID-19 requiring remote off-campus learning that it is often online compared to the normal campus experience. And I can talk more about it towards the end of the webinar. And we've got a dedicated session on the 22nd of September, 1 till 2, where we'll explain more about how we're running the surveys this year to reflect the needs that you have to get the data more quickly so you can respond in a quicker turnaround than maybe the annual cycle that we normally adopt. So just moving on, Sarah. So the reports that we've produced then about the student data, as I've mentioned, there's one for HE, one for FE, but we have also got a fuller report that goes in detail, question by question, and all of those three are available on our website under the reports tab. I'll talk at the end about how else the data is going to be accessible, but at the moment I'll hand over to my colleague Sarah Knight, who will go through the data from the 2020 student HE survey findings.
Thank you, Ruth, and yes, welcome. It's great to have so many colleagues joining us today from across the UK and also across the water as well, with some international colleagues, so welcome. Setting the scene is important just to start off with, and just to say that this year, despite the pandemic, we did actually collect the largest number of student responses from students in both FE and HE in the 4 years that we've been running the survey. So very, very pleased to have that volume of data for us to analyse. And I think it's given us a very, very rich picture around the digital experiences of our students. As you can see from this slide, we had over 20,000 responses from our HE students. The majority of those responses came pre-COVID, although we did have a small percentage which came in after the 23rd of March. And we were able to gather that data from 28 universities that we were working with. And I think this year it was very pleasing to see that the volume of responses per institution also increased over those years as well. So today I'm going to be sharing with you some of the highlights and some of the findings from the 4 themed areas within our survey. Those of you who are not familiar with running the surveys will be interested to know that we split our surveys into 4 themed areas, and those are represented on the slide. We have questions around asking students around how they are using their own technology, how they use technology at their university or college, technology in their learning, and for staff we have similar questions that are focusing on teaching or research if we're looking at researchers, and then questions around developing your digital skills. So although there is more depth and more insights within the fuller report that Ruth alluded to on the previous slide, what we'll be sharing today are just some snapshots of those key findings, and hoping you'll then be able to explore the reports in more detail to pick up some of those other question areas that may be of interest. So firstly, looking at theme 1, and here we are very much focusing on the devices that students have access to for their learning. And the percentages on that slide look quite high, they look quite promising, and I think probably in our pre-COVID world, we would be quite satisfied with those, knowing that students had the opportunity of accessing devices for their learning when they came in on campus. The questions that we're asking now are whether those devices that students own, and if you look there, there's a very high percentage of students that have been using smartphones for their learning. Those devices are not necessarily going to be suitable if they are learning remotely. And we know that institutions had to supplement the devices that students are accessing during the previous few months while students are studying at home. So we need to ask ourselves, are these devices sufficiently high spec to access the institutional systems you'll be providing? And do you have a mechanism in place to know that the students arriving on campus, what devices they have access to for their learning? Do they have access to Wi-Fi, mobile data, and importantly, if they are studying remotely, do they have a place to study that is secure, that is quiet, that is suitable and appropriate to support their learning needs? So some questions there that are useful to consider as we move forward into the new academic year. And this is a new question we added into the survey this year, and it's given us some interesting findings there in relation to students' attitudes and confidence. We can see there that students, a large percentage of students, 76%, were either very quiet or were either very or quite confident at trying out new technologies. And we also can see that over 50% of students also enjoyed trying out new and innovative technologies. But what we are seeing, though, is a slightly lower percentage of students who are comfortable in using mainstream technologies. And we always say it's really important to articulate the benefits of using technology to students in their learning, and to also think about the appropriateness of those technologies as they move forward into the workplace, to ensure that they are prepared to build that digital confidence and that resilience. So it's also important to think about going forward at the start of the new academic year, the mechanisms you have in place to ensure that students are given the requirements, the expectations that are going to be there about using technology going forward for their course this year, and knowing that we may be, or they may be accessing technology in a very different way to how they have done in previous years as well. Through the data that we collect, we are able to collect qualitative data. And of course, the qualitative data is really valuable for institutions at a local level. Some of the quotes we're able to harvest from that data are quite insightful. And I think this one in particular does sort of offer a cautionary word to say that we cannot make the assumption that all students have access to their devices in order to study off campus and remotely. We know that digital poverty is a theme that is coming up in many reports that we are observing. And although this quote rightly says students would be accessing technology within the library or other places on campus, of course, in lockdown, they weren't able to do that. So it's really important to have mechanisms in place where you are able to ascertain what devices your students have access to and to be able to support them with that if they don't. So moving on to theme 2, where we're looking at technology in your organisation. And these questions in this theme offer some valuable insights in terms of how students are accessing the services and the digital environment that universities are providing them. Here we can see, I think very pleasingly, that 85% of students rated the quality of their organisations as good, excellent or best imaginable. And I think that very much validates all the support and work that has been going on to ensure that students are having an excellent experience when they come into campus in relation to the digital environments that they may be accessing. We can see there as well that students have access to reliable Wi-Fi on campus, and that they agreed organisations let them access online systems and services. Now, bear in mind the majority of this data was collected pre-COVID, so we would want to ask the question whether those students were able to access the data remotely and access their systems remotely. And also, I think in terms of that last percentage there around agreeing their organisation support them to use their own devices, that is going to become even more important with the move to students working and learning in different contexts. We do need to ensure that students know where they can go for help and support with their own digital devices, and what the expectations may be in terms of their use and access to the services that they are being provided with. So some areas there that still perhaps might need some attention, particularly in thinking about inducting your new students as they arrive on campus. So if we're looking at technology in your organisation and looking at access to digital resources on demand, there are some interesting figures here that I think throw up some questions. You'll see there that although there's some quite high percentages there where we access online course materials, if they're looking to access ebooks and e-journals, but the figures drop when we're looking at access to recorded lectures, which again, if the students are studying remotely, we need to ensure that everyone can access any recorded content that is available. It's also looking there to ensure they have access to file storage and backup for their work, and looking at also access to online skills training resources and ways in which they can access materials. Now, it may be that these are all available. It might be that better signposting is needed for students, particularly in the online environment, so that they know where to access these materials if they need access to them. Now, we love the analysis of the qualitative data that we get, and I think this is really insightful, as we said earlier, about the information that it gives universities locally in terms of working with their students and getting that rich picture from the data. This question, I think, is really interesting. It asks students what platforms they use outside of the organisational learning environments they have access to discuss and collaborate with other students. And probably no surprises. I think that word cloud, there's some very strong contenders there that come up in that cloud. Unsurprisingly, the main means of discussing and collaborating was reported to be social media tools such as WhatsApp, Snapchat and Facebook, followed by tools such as email and Messenger. Video conferencing platforms such as Teams and Zooms feature there. And among social media, Facebook was probably more widely used and more widely cited, certainly with HE students. Messaging apps were considerably more widely used than email for communication. So I think, again, it shows the breadth of tools that students are accessing and using outside of the learning environment that they are provided with. Now, despite our championing the work of engaging students in digital and the work we've been doing around student partnerships, and I know many organisations are very heavily promoting the value of student partnerships and the projects with their students around digital, it's still disappointing to see that only 17% of HE students agreed they got the chance to be involved in decisions about digital services, and 41% actively disagreed that they had this opportunity. We certainly know that where students are involved, and the purpose of designing these surveys was very much to ensure that students felt they had a voice, that they could contribute, and they could be part of forming the digital environment that they are working within. The second area there is looking at how data is collected and used. And of course, in the current situation, we know that there is a lot more data that is being collected throughout society and of course throughout education as well. And yet only 36% of students agreed that organisations had told them how their data was collected and used. Now again, it may be, and I think we're probably all guilty of this, that there are many screens that we tend to click boxes on and agree to our data being used in different ways. But there is certainly something there that is signposting that we need to do more work in terms of raising awareness with students around data protection, GDPR, how their data may be used, and of course the transferability of their skills into their lives outside of the university as well, ensuring that they are more aware of the risks involved around the use of data. So I'm going to pause there. I'm going to hand over to Ruth because I'm aware that there has been a lot of comments coming through in the chat and also in the question and answer pane. So before we move on to theme 3, we'll just check to see what questions we have, Ruth.
Yes, we do have a couple in the question and answer set panel. So please do add them in there, as well as maybe the using the chat for more observations and thoughts about the data rather than actual questions. So first of all then, Sarah, we have Elizabeth Ellis from the OU, where she says, were we able to work out if there's a relationship between confidence and attitude? We've found a surprising inverse relationship to that sometimes students who are confident feel confident enough to opt out of technology-based learning. So that's an interesting question. I don't know if you'd like to take the mic, Elizabeth, and explain a bit more about what you did with your findings at the OU. Or Sarah, have you got any thoughts on the relationship between confidence and attitude?
I think that's a really interesting question, Ruth. And as I say, it was one of the new questions that we brought in this year. I think that this is an area where, well, it certainly needs more exploration on in terms of our data to see. And I think this would be an area as well that when we designed the surveys, we always imagined that these would be indicators of areas where institutions needed to work more closely with their students and unpick some of the findings and explore them in their local context. So, you know, again, I think this is an area which we would explore further with sort of focus group work with students and start to really pick up those nuances. Liz, do you want to take the mic? Katie or Jeanette, can we give Liz the opportunity of speaking?
Hi, brilliant. I hope you can hear me okay.
We can, brilliant, Liz.
Wonderful. That's really, I'm also really pleased that this question has been added in, because I think that it's an area that we really have very little research on. So I'm really excited about potentially being able to build up a picture of this, because I feel like there is something that happens here where so we found this is an inverse relationship, particularly around students who are new to HE, who actually lack confidence but have very positive attitude towards using technology and experiencing digital learning, whereas students who are more experienced actually are very confident but then choose to opt out. And I have found, I mean, I've sometimes called this sort of sophisticated opting out, because there really is very much a decision-making process that goes with that. And I feel like there's potentially something really rich in that, the choices that students are making there. But some of that obviously is, as I sort of said in my comment, some of that comes from pre-COVID. So of course, in a situation where you have no choice, we all have to make different decisions. But I'm really excited about this as a potential area of exploration, really.
Oh, great. Well, I hope that we can have offline conversations about that topic after the session as well, because I think it's of interest to us too.
Super. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Then we have another question from Naomi Smith. Do you think the digital divide can be solved by institutions, or is it a wider socio-economic problem that can only be solved by government measures?
Oh, and I think that also picks up on the question from Rob Howe from Northampton, who's asking if there's any work with phone suppliers to mitigate data fees. Yes, we are. We have been lobbying DFE together with UUK and Association of Colleges to very much work with mobile phone suppliers to address this. So there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes to try and look at ways in which we can try and mitigate some of these quite urgent needs from our students at the moment. And I think, you know, the question that Naomi has asked around the digital divide, yes, it is obviously a wider socioeconomic problem, but I do think that we are seeing areas, you know, especially with both in FE and HE, where institutions are aware that there are issues around access, that those issues are addressed. There are some universities who I know who will issue their students with a device. You know, that we need to be looking at different ways now. If that's an essential tool to enable students to learn, you know, it's a prerequisite, but otherwise it is something there that we need to be ensuring that there is a level playing field for all students to be able to access those devices.
Thank you, Naomi. And then Jay, Derek asks, are these data differentiated between undergraduate and postgraduate students or by age? Suspect answers on devices and popular apps may vary a great deal. So Sarah, would you like to take that?
Yes, I mean, we certainly, within our question set, we have a question there that does distinguish between undergraduate and postgraduates and age. So we can drill down into the data, and we'll come back to that at the end, Ruth, because they're the exciting opportunity that we have in terms of being able to share the data sets openly will allow you and us to drill down into more detail with our data dashboards, but we'll say a little bit more around that at the end.
Yeah, and institutions that take part can look at their data and segment it as they wish. So if they think there's a potential issue there, they can divide their data up. We've got one from Ian Wilson. The student voice comes through with the communication questions, WhatsApp, etc. Do you think that institutions should adapt to what the students are using, or just say what they think is best?
I think this has been an age-old debate around do we start communicating with students around using the apps that they use, or do we continue to use institutional systems? And I think that, again, there are very different models emerging. You know, there is a train of thought that says, actually, we need to be training our students to use the applications and communications tools that they're going to be using when they move out into the workplace. So I think certainly over the last few months, we've seen a lot more use of Microsoft Teams, for example, as a way of collaborating and communicating with students in order to be able to prepare them more effectively for the workplace. Similarly, we are also, you know, we know that some staff may be using WhatsApp or Facebook with communicating with their students. It very much goes back to being explicit around what the expectations are around communication and how best to communicate with your cohort of students. I think that's where that question around, you know, engaging students around decisions. They will, of course, be the institutional communication tools, and you know, those are still there. And I think there is a very strong argument for encouraging students to get more familiar with those tools, as we said, in order to prepare them for the workplace, but also ensuring that, you know, you have that dialogue with your students around the expectations of how you will be communicating. I think, you know, with the changes that we've seen over the past few months, I think everyone is getting more familiar with a range of different communication tools that are there. And I think, you know, it's down to, in some cases, sort of preferences, both of students and staff, in terms of what they may want to use for more informal communications.
Okay, and then lastly, because I know time is very precious for everybody, we have Joe FA. Is there any qualitative data which defines what the digital provision that students are being asked to rate is? When speaking to students, we have found that their definition of digital is quite broad.
I think that's very true, and I think some of the later questions that I'll be sharing, I hope, will perhaps pick up on that question. You know, even if you ask everyone on the webinar today, everyone will have a different perception of what digital means to them. And, you know, we've always said the surveys don't replace that discussion with your students and that engagement with your students in terms of further follow-up and discussion. But equally, you know, I think the questions that we'll move on to will perhaps unpick some of that in a bit more detail. So thank you for those very rich questions there. We'll move on to theme 3, and please do continue to share your thoughts and reflections on the questions. So moving on to technology in your learning, and please be aware that these are only a snapshot of the rich set of questions that we have pulled together, and more detail is in the reports, as Ruth mentioned at the start. So if we're looking at technology in your learning, there is a question there that relates to quality of digital teaching and learning. Again, it's subjective, but it is a rating question that we have used over the past few years to get a measure of how students are rating the quality of their provision that they're experiencing. And you can see again that 77% of students are very positive about their experience. There's a question that talks about who supports you most to use technology in learning. And I think here in particular, it's interesting to see that students, the highest percentage of students cite the lecturers on their course as the most common source of support. And I think that again goes back to the importance of ensuring that our lecturers and teaching staff have got the digital skills and capabilities in order to be able to support students effectively. You'll see there the other learners, peer-to-peer support is important, and also accessing online videos and resources. And we'll come back to that one in a moment. So with the free text question that we asked in this theme, we were asking students to share the digital tools or apps students find really useful for learning. And I think this is a really interesting one because it does show the vast range of tools and apps that students are using for their learning. And we had over 11,000 students that answered this question, so a very, very rich source that was coded there. So the 4 types of applications as their top choices for learning were firstly their learning environment, and you can see some familiar names coming through in that word cloud there. Quiz and test applications were also coming through very strongly. I think that shows, there was some of the tools and apps that were indicated in there. Online learning materials, which was really the largest group that was cited by HE students out of the analysis there. But also online research tools such as search engines and library catalogues as well. I think the popularity of online learning materials has gone up significantly when compared to last year's respondents. The word that is coming out most strongly in that word cloud is YouTube, which features very predominantly and does link back to the percentage of students that were using online video resources as areas of support. When we have interviewed students in terms of the focus group work we've done with students previously and asked them the question, YouTube always comes to the fore in terms of where I can find an example or some further materials to support their learning. So that still features very strongly in there. So this question is an interesting one and one we've used over a number of years now to give an indication of the types of digital activities that students are doing, either monthly or more frequently. And here I think there's quite an interesting range of responses that when we start with the 90% of HE students said they received digital feedback on their work, working at 77% working with data, and then the numbers start to drop. So much so that we only have 56% of students who worked online with other students. Now, bearing in mind, obviously, that was more pre-COVID, but even so, there were 44% of students who said they never had that opportunity to do so. And if we are thinking about the workplace, either pre or post-COVID, we know that that is an essential skill that students do require. We need to be preparing our students better to be able to collaborate online, as we know that that's an expectation from employers. Interestingly, the only 20% of students said they use simulations, virtual or augmented reality. And this is certainly an area where I think there is opportunity for growth and development, particularly as we may have students now who are not able to access some of the real world situations that they may be required to do either in labs or field work. So this is certainly sort of an area for development, and we know that there's some very innovative practice happening across the sector, but is perhaps still quite niche. So when we ask students what one thing, and I love our what one thing questions, should your university do to improve the quality of digital teaching and learning? And students, over 11,000 students completed this question. And And this question was really designed to yield actionable information to participating organisations. As anticipated, students used this question as an opportunity to raise what they most urgently wanted changing. Their answers do not provide a balanced view of their digital experience, nor do they necessarily reveal the issues that would be at the top of students' priorities at all other colleges and universities. However, the following figures and analysis should be read with that in mind. And despite that, there were some strong themes that were coming out through the analysis of those responses. The top one, in terms of helping teaching staff to develop digital skills so they can support students effectively, is an important one. Looking to ensure that all lectures are recorded and uploaded promptly. And one that has been on the list for many years, and even since we started some of our learner experience work many years ago, around improving consistency and navigation of the online environment, so that students know where they can find information easily. And more interactivity and collaboration in their learning, which ties back to the stats on the previous slide. So some important themes there that are emerging. Now, I picked out these comments just to sort of give a bit of a balance in terms of the information that we did collect post-COVID. And you'll see there that you know, there are some very concerning quotes that students were sharing. But equally, some very positive quotes there in terms of the support that they were getting. So thinking about the experience students are now going into, it's really ensuring that we can have that equitable experience for all. And communication, building that sense of community, both with their peers and with their tutors and their teachers, is absolutely paramount. So moving on to theme 4, which focuses on developing digital skills. And this theme, I think, again, gives you know, some very important indicators in terms of how well students feel they are supported with developing their capabilities and confidence. With the other indicator questions, the rating questions, we're having quite high percentages for quality of the learning environment, quality of digital teaching and learning. Whereas here we're seeing the percentage drop to 60% related to the quality of support they received to develop their digital skills as good, excellent, or best imaginable. Now, there is a concerning sort of stat there that only 21% of HE students did not discuss their digital skills in any context. And that obviously is really concerning if we are looking at ensuring our students are fully prepared for a digital workplace. Only 51% of students agreed they received advice and guidance about the digital skills they needed for their course. And going back to sort of what I was saying earlier about the importance at the start to ensure that students are aware of how they're going to be using technology, what are the benefits, how does it relate to their course, how does it relate to the skills they're developing for their career. And also then having the opportunity to be able to assess their digital skills as they progress through their education experience, and particularly thinking about their progression and their career planning. We had a number of really quite insightful quotes from students who were really identifying missed opportunities for their development of their digital skills. And that comes through very strongly in some of the further slides as well. So again, looking at our free text question for our qualitative analysis, HE students specified the type of support that they wanted more often. So they wanted opportunities to develop their digital skills within courses of study, in standalone workshops, as online training, sort of online resources, and including the use of video, for example. Students also asked for face-to-face opportunities, more so than opportunities online. And they also referred to the content that they wanted support on. So there were quite some specific areas of support that students were identifying, including sort of data analysis, research and information skills, for example. So HE students referred to issues not directly relating to developing digital skills, but also those that were presenting barriers or perceived barriers to skills development. And these also included access to hardware, Wi-Fi, software, and suitable learning spaces. So I'm going to pause there. If we can have a look at the questions that have come in, Ruth, before we move on to some of the final sort of recommendations. And
yep, so we've had a few come in, and we've got maybe 10 minutes or so to have a discussion about these. So Teresa asks, what do you think is the reason for the gap between the 85% who thought quality was good enough, etc., for digital tech within the institution, and only 77% who thought the quality of digital teaching and learning was good, etc.? Then it's a bit of a double barrel question. Similarly, only 3% not motivated, yet 10% did none of those things, which implies lack of motivation to take part in the digital activities, or possibly lack of access. So it's the reason for the gap between the 85 who thought the quality was good for digital teaching, but only 77 who thought the digital quality was good.
I think the first part's relation to the question around the digital environment. So that broad question around access to the digital that they are experiencing in terms of the learning environment. Whereas the 77% is actually looking at the quality of the teaching that they are receiving, or the access to the digital learning. You know, I think we need to explore these in more detail, and we need to actually drill down at an institutional level where institutions are collecting this data to see what those differences would be. And again, you know, there's sort of the premise I was saying earlier, that these are indicators, and it's then sort of drilling down in terms of actually looking at some of the qualitative analysis questions, as you know, as we've done in some of these in relation to the areas where students do need more support. So this, you know, the difference, for example, on the 77% could be around that students perhaps are not being able to access recorded lectures promptly, or may not have access to them at all. They may be having barriers in terms of access to some of the online materials that may be provided. They may not be having opportunities to collaborate. So that's where we really do need to drill down in more detail at a local level to explore some of these in a bit more detail. The next question, Ruth, I think was what was the question about one thing that universities could do, open form, or were the responses from a predefined list? No, it was purely open. So this was again, open free text, and students were able to add in any particular response they wished. We then grouped those responses, and when I say we, Helen Beetham and Tabitha Newman, who've been working with us on the analysis, were able to dig into that data and do some of the grouping and the coding accordingly.
And Russell asks, has anyone experienced success in persuading academic colleagues to develop their digital skills? Tends to be a wide span of skills across the institution, ranging from the very keen to use technology to those who seem to feel that its activity hinders their teaching style.
We have a parallel initiative that we have again been working on for many years called Building Digital Capability, and we have over 64 colleges and universities who are very proactively working with their staff and their students to develop their digital capabilities. It's no longer optional, particularly in the world that we are now in. And you know, I'd be very surprised if staff are still questioning that that reason for them to develop their capabilities and skills. We are working in an environment where, as part of being a professional academic, it is about not only keeping your academic credibility up to date, but it's also ensuring that you have got the digital skills in order to be able to deliver research and use that appropriately. Where we are seeing a lot of progress being made is where universities and colleges are identifying that and recognising that, and putting into place support for continuing professional development, linking through to staff appraisal, and ensuring that there is the support there and the leadership there to ensure that digital is no longer optional but seamless in all that we do. And we need to be supporting our staff to develop those skills. There is more advice if available from our digital capability website, and perhaps Claire, if you're able to add a link into the chat window there, we can offer some links. Thank you for those questions. Please do. We will be obviously saving all the chat so that we can go back and revisit this, as I know that there's a lot more going on in the chat window as well. So just to finish off then, I think it's important as well just to sort of share some of the themes that have been coming through, which do pick up on the impact of the pandemic. Within some of the responses that we were getting, you saw some of the quotes there, and that was just a very, very, very snapshot view of some of the very many data responses that we had. There were some themes coming through there in terms of feelings of disconnection and requests for more contact and support. And I think that goes back to what we're seeing from anecdotal views from students that we've been interviewing, that there has to be that connection. Students do need to feel that they have got that connection to their university, to their tutors. They know where they can go for support, and that there is that sense of belonging that is still there in the virtual community. We can see more recorded lectures. And I think not to say that we only are thinking about transferring what we do in a face-to-face situation into an online situation. We know that's never going to work, but we do need to make sure that content is available for students so that they can revisit that if required. Basic skills in terms of digital access to learning, absolutely. Loans of laptops, the need for staff training, particularly I think staff have been so responsive in terms of moving into the online environment, but that's not to say that they don't need the support now in order to be able to use those tools more effectively in their practice. We know that there needs to be better remote access, thinking about also students that may be international students that may not be in the UK but are still needing to access their learning, and there needs to be a greater consistency in the use of technology and feedback methods. So if we were to synthesize that down in some of the key themes that are coming through, and I don't think there are any surprises in these, I think these themes echo the reports that we have as just released around Learning and Teaching Reimagined, our Digital Learning Rebooted reports, and also the reshaping of the digital future for FE. There's some very strong themes coming in there around pedagogy and learning design, around being able to ensure that there is equitable access, and we know that that is the most important requirement to ensure we have got right in order to ensure there isn't that inequality there in terms of access to learning, looking at supporting our students' digital capabilities, and a reminder that these are themes that go from pre-induction, pre-arrival, right the way through in terms of the student's journey with you on their course and into progression into the workplace and alumni, and that we need to be thinking about how we can support the students through all aspects of their time with us. And just picking up more importantly on the pedagogy and learning design aspect, we know that there are some opportunities here to really revisit our curriculum and assessment design, to look at ways in which we can ensure that we are building in digital capabilities into the curriculum, to ensure that we are thinking about interactivity and collaboration in the activities that we design, that we can ensure that accessibility and well-being are built in from the start rather as an afterthought, and that we can really reinvigorate the way in which we are assessing our learning. We know that that is an area that was particularly challenging, and what we saw students throughout the education sector experience over the past couple of months has really sort of shown that we need to ensure that there are better measures in place if we are truly to be supporting our students through that. We know we need to ensure that we have industry buy-in to our design, and we know that the importance of working in partnership, both with students, with staff and with industry, is going to be key in terms of taking the curriculum forward and ensuring that we are building those digital futures for our students that are going to meet the expectations of our employers. And finally, just to sort of echo that point earlier, that we know we need to be ensuring that everyone can connect, collaborate, and really ensure that technology is offering the most benefits in that area as well. So the opportunities are there, I think, to redesign, redevelop, reinvigorate the curriculum to ensure that we are offering the best digital experience for our students. Ruth, I'm going to hand back to you now, and then we can perhaps take a few final questions at the end.
Thank you, Sarah. So here we've got links to the 3 reports then, the HE, the FE, and the full question by question report. So that gives you all the detail, whereas the other 2 are a higher level that gives summary findings, but we hope that it's really pertinent and a good read to share with your colleagues that might be a bit time poor. As we've mentioned already, we are about to launch in the very near future the data that we've used to create these reports in a public Tableau. So that means that anybody will be able to look at the data and manipulate it with the filters that we have there to answer some of their own questions. So for example, like the difference between postgraduate or undergraduate or certain age groups. The data will be held securely, so you can't look at individual institutions' data. You'd have to do that within the online survey tool that we use to run the surveys. So that would be for participating institutions. But we were keen to make the data set available for open research. And so that's why we're doing it. We'll be running a pilot phase with a few users. So if you're interested in looking at this data, have a sneak preview, please do get in touch with me. That's Ruth Drysdale at gist.ac.k, so that we can help refine the user interface and make sure that it's intuitive and easy to use for people like yourselves. Sarah, yeah, so then we've also got some more webinars. So next week on Tuesday, the 22nd of September, we've got a Getting Started webinar, and anybody's able to join us for that, but it's primarily focused at those that will be running the new question set from October onwards, so for subscribing institutions. There's resources there, a GIST toolkit to support the digital experience of new students, and that's freely available on our website, so anybody can access that. So please do have a look. If you think that there are issues that we've discussed in the presentation today that you would like to better understand with your students, you can have a look at that toolkit and help those new students understand what expectations your courses will have of them. If you're interested in running the surveys, but your institution isn't already subscribed, there's a link there. And then we're running a joint community of practice event on the 17th of November. So that's with the sister service, Building Digital Capability, because we have several institutions that run both the digital insight surveys as well as the Building Digital Capability tool. And it's to understand from the sector how they're using the tools and how they're addressing other issues that they have around their digital transformation strategies and how they're coping with the current situation. So please do join that JISC list so you get notified of these events. And if you'd like to contact us, then you can always do that at help@jisc.ac.uk. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Sarah, before we sign off?
No, I think that probably covers it, Ruth. And just a key there to say, do think about these results in the context of your own organisation. I know there's been a huge amount of really excellent comments and reflections in the chat window that I haven't had a chance to read, but we will be referring to. I do say, if you would like to get in touch with us, either to join the community of practice, please do, because that will then keep you in touch with the work that we are doing, and the community is a very vibrant one, lots of sharing of practice around this theme. But also, if you would like to run the surveys in your own institution, again, please get in touch with us through the subscribe, find out more link that is on that slide. I would like to just acknowledge that this work doesn't happen without universities and colleges taking part, and to thank all of those that have participated in to give us the data that we have collected this year. But also a special thank you to the team behind the scenes who does make this all possible. And that is our sort of analyst, Mark Langer-Crane, Claire Killen, who has produced the reports with us, and Helen Beetham and Tabitha Newman, who have done the qualitative analysis for us, and of course Ruth as well, who has been project managing all of this work. So thank you to everyone who's contributed. We will be sharing a recording, and we will be sharing the slides, so they will be sent out to you in the same way that you registered with us. We'll get that information out to you very shortly. So thank you all for your contributions today.